Imagine standing in your childhood home, watching a man in a bespoke suit paid for with your mother's stolen money, waving a document he believes just made him a multimillionaire. He thinks he outsmarted his quiet sister-in-law, wholly unaware that by presenting that paper, he just triggered an inescapable digital bear trap I designed myself. If you have ever watched toxic family members play the victim to steal, you will absolutely love watching this man's entire world burn. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. We are so incredibly grateful for your continued support, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep bringing these stories to life. If you enjoy today's episode, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon, where you will find exclusive, true stories that are longer, much more detailed, and feature multiple emotional voice actors bringing the drama to life, content we simply cannot publicize here on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment below. Now, let us begin today's story from the perspective of our main character, Sophie Crawford. The reception took place in my late mother Eleanor's stunning mid-century modern home, a sprawling architectural masterpiece perched high above the misty, unforgiving coast of Seattle. The dense, gray fog rolling in off the Pacific Ocean seemed to press aggressively against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, mirroring the heavy, suffocating atmosphere building inside the house. The expansive living room was packed shoulder to shoulder, though not with the usual warm, comforting hum of a grieving family gathering. Instead, the space was filled with a formidable and highly influential crowd of retired aerospace engineers, elite tech executives, and affluent neighbors who had spent decades respecting my mother's brilliant, pioneering mind. The air smelled strongly of expensive catering, aged cedar wood, and overwhelming arrangements of white lilies, creating a stark, clinical contrast to the vibrant, chaotic brilliance my mother had radiated every single day of her life. I am Sophie Crawford. I am 32 years old, and I stood quietly in the periphery, leaning my shoulder against the cold stone of the massive fireplace. I gripped a ceramic mug of bitter black coffee with both hands, squeezing the handle just to have something to anchor my trembling fingers. I was not trembling from the sting of fresh tears, but from the sheer, nauseating restraint required to silently witness the sickening spectacle unfolding in the center of the room. While I deliberately kept myself hidden in the shadows, my brother-in-law, Julian, commanded the room as if it were his own personal Silicon Valley keynote stage. Julian was a quintessential, smooth-talking, venture capital-obsessed tech bro, the kind of man who wore bespoke Italian suits and threw around buzzwords like synergy and disruption. He ran a flashy wellness tech startup that constantly touted revolutionary health metrics but was, in reality, perpetually struggling and aggressively hemorrhaging investor cash. Directly beside him stood my older sister, Chloe. She was playing the meticulously crafted role of the exhausted, tragic caregiver to absolute, sickening perfection. She was dressed head to toe in pristine, custom-tailored designer morning clothes that looked much more suited for a high-fashion editorial shoot than a somber funeral reception. As she leaned heavily against Julian's arm for performative support, she kept dabbing her completely dry eyes with a monogrammed silk handkerchief. It was a highly polished display of artificial grief, custom-tailored for the benefit of her wealthy, influential audience, meant to paint her as the ultimate martyr. The ambient, low-pitched murmur of polite condolences and clinking porcelain was abruptly shattered when Julian reached over and sharply tapped a silver spoon against a crystal champagne flute. The sharp, piercing ping cut right through the heavy air, demanding absolute, unquestioning silence from the esteemed guests. He slowly buttoned his bespoke suit jacket, puffed out his chest, and adopted a deep tone of rehearsed, masculine authority that made my stomach physically turn. "Family, friends, and esteemed colleagues of our beloved Eleanor," Julian began, his voice dripping with heavy, faux solemnity. "We are all utterly devastated by this profound and sudden loss. Eleanor was an absolute titan in her field, A true visionary, but as you all know, she was also a woman of immense precision and unyielding logic. It was her strict final directive that her worldly affairs be settled immediately today, surrounded by her most trusted peers, to avoid any messy, drawn-out corporate probate that could tarnish her legacy. With a dramatic, highly calculated flourish that he had clearly practiced in front of a mirror, Julian pulled a sleek, matte black tablet from the inner pocket of his jacket. He tapped the glowing screen, and instantly, the living room's massive smart glass accent wall transitioned from an opaque, slate gray to a blinding, high-definition digital display. He confidently projected a digitally notarized document labeled Smart Estate Contract in bold, sterile lettering for the entire room to see. Eleanor always embraced the bleeding edge of the future, Julian continued, projecting his booming voice to the very back of the hushed room. Just 3 weeks before her passing, she completely updated her final will and testament. She encoded it securely on the blockchain, ensuring her life's work would be handled with the exact technological sophistication she championed during her remarkable career. The room leaned in collectively, captivated by the harsh glow of the smart wall and the authoritative weight of Julian's words. Then, Julian slowly turned his head. His gaze cut straight through the crowd of engineers and executives, locking dead onto me standing by the fireplace. A smug, predatory glint danced wildly in his eyes. "As many of you know," he projected loudly, his tone turning sharp and condemning, ensuring every single guest heard him clearly, "Chloe has sacrificed absolutely everything, her health, her career, her peace of mind, to be by Eleanor's side during these agonizing final months. Meanwhile, others chose a vastly different path." He sneered, raising a perfectly manicured finger and pointing it directly across the room at me. "Because Sophie selfishly abandoned her dying mother, running off to work some low-level IT job down in Austin, Texas, Eleanor made a definitive, unbreakable choice. She has officially left her entire $8 million estate, all of her highly valuable aerospace tech patents, and this exact coastal property exclusively and entirely to Chloe." A collective, sharp gasp rippled through the expansive living room, slicing through the heavy silence that had settled over the crowd. It was the sound of dozens of highly educated, influential people collectively clutching their pearls. Almost instantly, the atmosphere in the room morphed from polite mourning into a suffocating, hostile tribunal. The judging glares of my extended family swiveled toward me like searchlights. My aunts and uncles, people who had known me since I was in diapers, looked at me with profound, unfiltered disappointment. Their reaction was not spontaneous. It was the calculated result of a multi-year smear campaign. For years, Chloe had meticulously curated her social media feeds, posting tragic, sepia-toned photos holding our mother's frail hand, accompanied by lengthy, agonizing captions about bearing the heavy burden of elder care completely alone. She had painted a masterful digital portrait of me as the heartless, absentee daughter who had cruelly abandoned her family for a frivolous life down south, and this wealthy, gullible crowd had swallowed every single bitter drop of that narrative. But Julian was far from finished. Having successfully turned the room into a weapon, he intended to wield it. He took a heavy, imposing step forward, his designer shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. He publicly berated me, his voice booming with the righteous indignation of a seasoned con artist. "It is incredibly easy to stand there in the shadows, Sophie, drinking coffee while the rest of us pick up the shattered pieces of the life you left behind." Julian sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "Do you have any idea what it actually took to keep Eleanor comfortable? Chloe and I practically bankrupted my company to ensure your mother had the absolute best. We paid out of pocket for state-of-the-art experimental cybernetic mobility treatments. We financed round-the-clock private nursing when her condition deteriorated. I drained my own startup's operational capital just to keep her breathing while you were completely unreachable." Right on cue, Chloe stepped forward, flawlessly executing her role in this sickening theatrical production. She let out a perfectly timed, trembling sob that echoed tragically off the vaulted ceilings. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with fabricated grief before looking up with wide, pleading eyes at the audience of retired engineers and affluent neighbors. "I gave up my entire youth for her," Chloe cried, her voice cracking with the precise pitch of a seasoned soap opera actress. "I sacrificed my sanity, my career, my marriage. I was the one bathing her. Sophie, I was the one spoon-feeding our mother her meals when her hands shook too much to hold a fork. I spent endless agonizing nights awake listening to her monitor, terrified she would slip away, while you were out living your incredibly selfish, carefree life in Texas, ignoring our calls." The sheer audacity of her lies was staggering. The crowd muttered in sympathetic outrage, wrapping Chloe in a warm blanket of collective pity. Then, Julian moved in for the kill. He tapped his sleek tablet once more. The smart glass wall flickered, swapping the fake estate contract for a massive, heavily itemized invoice bearing the logo of an elite, private biotech clinic. The bold, red numbers at the bottom of the screen glared down at the room. "This is the reality of your absence," Julian announced, his voice booming as he pointed forcefully at the projection. "We are currently drowning under a massive medical debt of $250,000. We absorbed this monumental financial hit because we actually loved Eleanor, but you do not get to just waltz back into this house today, empty-handed, and pretend you are a grieving daughter. You are going to take responsibility right now." He squared his shoulders, attempting a ruthless, very public extortion. "If you want to walk out of those front doors today with even a single shred of dignity left to your name," Julian demanded, his eyes completely devoid of warmth, "you are going to instantly wire us $125,000. That is exactly 50%. Your fair share of the burden. You will pay it right now, before you are allowed to leave this property." The wealthy crowd immediately formed a hostile, unified front against me. The tension was thick enough to choke on. From the back of the room, my Uncle Robert, a retired aeronautics executive with a notoriously quick temper, stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Pay your sister, Sophie," he demanded loudly, his voice echoing with absolute disgust. "Have you absolutely no shame showing your face at your own mother's funeral without offering a single dime to the people who kept her alive? Wire them the money immediately and apologize for your pathetic behavior." They all expected me to crumble. They expected me to break down in humiliating, hysterical tears, overwhelmed by the crushing public shaming and the immense psychological pressure of the room. They expected the quiet, passive younger sister to simply bow her head, open her banking app, and surrender to their audacious demands just to escape the burning humiliation. Instead, I did not shed a single tear. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not reach for my phone to wire them a single cent, moving with slow, deliberate precision. I calmly set my ceramic coffee mug down on the edge of the stone fireplace mantel. The soft clink of the ceramic against the stone sounded incredibly loud in my own ears. As I looked back up at Julian's smug, victorious face and Chloe's fake, tear-stained cheeks, I did not feel fear. I felt a terrifying, icy composure wash over every single nerve in my body. A cold, predatory calm settled deep in my chest, because I knew something that this entire room of affluent, judgmental strangers did not. Julian and Chloe had just made a catastrophic, life-ending miscalculation regarding who I actually am, and they were about to find out exactly what happens when you try to trap a ghost in a digital cage. I pushed away from the cold stone of the fireplace and walked deliberately into the dead center of the living room. The heavy heels of my boots struck the polished hardwood floor with a rhythmic, unyielding precision that commanded immediate, absolute attention. I stopped directly in front of Julian and Chloe, ensuring there was absolutely nothing between us but the rapidly thinning air. I squared my shoulders, looking directly into Julian's predatory eyes. "I am not giving you a single cent," I stated loudly, my voice ringing out with absolute, undeniable finality. Another sharp gasp ripped through the affluent audience. A few people muttered in genuine shock at my sheer insolence, but I completely ignored them. My focus remained entirely locked onto Julian. His smug, victorious smile faltered for a fraction of a second, quickly replaced by a momentary flicker of deep confusion. He opened his mouth to berate me again, but I cut him off with surgical precision. For the past 5 years, I continued, my tone shifting instantly from familial detachment to the clinical, aggressive cadence of a courtroom prosecutor. You have told everyone in this room that I am a low-level tech support worker, supposedly fixing faulty network routers in a dusty Texas cubicle. That was a highly convenient lie that I allowed you to propagate because it kept you incredibly careless. I do not fix routers. Julian, I am a senior cybersecurity architect and a lead digital forensics expert at Aegis Vanguard Solutions. We are a highly classified private intelligence firm that specializes exclusively in dismantling international financial fraud networks, recovering embezzled corporate assets, and tracking illicit digital syndicates. Julian actually took a physical step backward. The healthy, sun-kissed color drained entirely from his face as the catastrophic weight of my words violently collided with his meticulously constructed reality. Without breaking eye contact, I unzipped the sleek, unassuming black leather portfolio tucked under my arm and pulled out my heavily encrypted, military-grade field laptop. I flipped it open, my fingers immediately flying across the illuminated keyboard with the rapid, flawless muscle memory honed over thousands of hours of aggressive network penetration testing. This entire house is wired with a localized smart hub network, I announced to the hushed, captivated room, which means it is entirely vulnerable if you possess the right administrative decryption keys that I personally coded into this primary system over 3 years ago. I hit the final execution command. The massive smart glass wall directly behind Julian flickered violently. The fake medical invoice he had proudly displayed suddenly scrambled into a mess of harsh digital static, and then the massive screen went entirely black. Julian panicked. He frantically mashed his fingers against the glowing glass of his sleek tablet, his breathing rapidly accelerating into a frantic staccato as error messages flooded his screen. "It is absolutely no use," I informed him coldly, relishing the sheer panic radiating from his body. "I have completely overridden your administrative privileges, terminated your session, and permanently locked your device out of the local area network. Your pathetic presentation is over. Mine is just beginning." I pressed a single key, and the smart glass wall instantly illuminated with my own high-definition display. I projected a series of certified, irrefutable digital financial ledgers bearing the official, encrypted watermarks of Eleanor's comprehensive medical insurance provider and the federal Medicare database. "As you can clearly see," I narrated methodically, using my cursor to point to the meticulously highlighted rows of reconciled financial data. Every single medical procedure, every single hour of private nursing, and every advanced cybernetic mobility treatment my mother received was covered exactly 100% by her premium insurance policies. There were absolutely zero out-of-pocket expenses for her care. The crowd murmured aggressively, stepping closer to squint at the undeniable, legally binding proof. I brought up a new, highly detailed forensic window right beside the ledgers. "As for that massive $250,000 medical debt you just tried to use to extort me," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register, I displayed a raw, unedited metadata extraction of the exact billing document Julian had forced upon the room just moments ago. "This is not a legitimate medical bill from a private biotech clinic. This is a poorly formatted, amateurishly fabricated PDF document, and if you look closely at the underlying digital footprint highlighted in red, you will see it was created exactly 4 days ago. It was authored on a specific laptop definitively registered to Julian's wellness startup, and the entire file was routed directly through his personal residential internet protocol address." Julian opened his mouth, stammering incoherently, desperately trying to formulate a defense, but I immediately pivoted my attention toward my sister. Chloe was frozen dead in her tracks. Her manufactured, theatrical tears instantly dried up as sheer, unadulterated terror washed over her perfectly contoured, pale face. Do not think for a single second that I forgot about your monumental, tragic sacrifices. Chloe, I stated, my voice completely devoid of any remaining sisterly warmth. I split the massive projection screen into two distinct, unavoidable halves. On the left side of the glass wall, I displayed a scrolling grid of Chloe's most tragic, attention-seeking Instagram posts. I expanded a specific, highly liked photograph showing a frail, heavily manicured hand holding our mother's bruised hand, accompanied by a lengthy caption detailing a grueling, sleepless 48-hour vigil by Eleanor's bedside. This specific post, I explained to the breathless room, was uploaded precisely on the 12th of August of last year. It generated hundreds of sympathetic comments from many of you standing in this very room today. Then, I aggressively activated the right side of the screen. A highly detailed digital map of the West Coast materialized, instantly overlaid with a bright red, undeniable global positioning system tracking path and a corresponding time-stamped list of verified banking transactions. Unfortunately for your carefully constructed martyr narrative, I continued relentlessly, this is your actual, real-time cellular location data, legally cross-referenced with your personal premium credit card swipes for that exact same weekend. You were not holding our dying mother's hand in Seattle. You were over 800 miles away, enjoying a massive $5,000 luxury spa retreat at a highly exclusive resort in Napa Valley. You deliberately posted a pre-taken photograph to digitally harvest sympathy and financial donations from this crowd while you were getting hot stone massages and ordering vintage champagne on room service. I ruthlessly advanced the slide, rapidly matching 3 more of her most heartbreaking, tear-jerking caregiver posts with precise geographical coordinates. The data definitively proved she was physically present at exclusive designer boutiques, high-end yacht clubs, and elite culinary tasting events hundreds of miles away on the exact days she claimed to be wiping our mother's brow. The expansive, crowded living room fell utterly, suffocatingly silent. The wealthy aunts and uncles who, just 5 minutes prior, had been aggressively scolding me and demanding my total humiliation, now stared at the glowing smart glass wall in mounting, absolute horror. I watched the sickening realization wash over their aged faces like a freezing tidal wave. The golden child's pristine, saintly facade was not just cracking under the pressure, it was violently shattering into a million irreparable pieces right in front of their eyes. The sheer, visceral panic finally broke through Julian's heavily polished exterior, shattering his confident facade in a matter of seconds. He lunged frantically across the center of the living room, violently knocking over a towering, expensive arrangement of white lilies. He scrambled desperately behind the massive media console, his hands clawing wildly at the thick bundle of power cables connected to the primary audiovisual hardware hub. With a violent, unhinged jerk, he ripped the main power cord straight out of the wall socket, plunging the entire physical projection system into darkness. He stood up slowly, his chest heaving under his custom suit, a manic, breathless grin of relief washing over his sweating face as he looked at the now black glass wall. But that pathetic relief did not even last a full 2 seconds. He severely underestimated the architecture of the trap I had built. I did not need his local hardware at all. My fingers danced across my keyboard, instantly bypassing the physical connections and routing my transmission signal directly through the home's decentralized, battery-backed emergency smart grid. The massive smart glass wall instantly re-illuminated, glowing even brighter and sharper than before, projecting my unyielding digital evidence across the entire room. The technological snare was absolute, and he was completely, inescapably cornered. I stepped closer to the glowing wall, my voice slicing through his heavy, panicked breathing like a serrated scalpel. Your pathetic wellness startup is not simply struggling. Julian, I announced to the breathless, captivated room, it has been functionally, irreversibly bankrupt for exactly 3 years. A wave of shocked, angry mutters erupted from the wealthy tech executives and private investors scattered throughout the crowd who had previously backed him. You have not possessed a single legitimate operational asset, Since your initial seed funding completely dried up, I continued, pushing the blade deeper. You have been actively surviving by illegally siphoning my mother's personal, hard-earned funds to cover your massive, utterly disastrous cryptocurrency margins. You recklessly leveraged her entire life savings on highly unregulated, offshore crypto exchanges, completely decimating her secure accounts while pretending to be an elite, visionary entrepreneur to everyone in this room. That is a complete fabrication, Julian screamed, his voice cracking with raw, unhinged desperation. He pointed a shaking, aggressive finger directly at the glowing projection. Eleanor knew exactly what I was doing. She believed in my technological vision. She willingly authorized every single one of those massive bank transfers. I have the recorded vocal authorizations. I have her voice perfectly on file, agreeing to every single crypto investment. I did not even blink, nor did I raise my voice. I simply hit another key on my encrypted laptop. The massive smart glass screen smoothly split into a side-by-side comparative digital analysis. On the left side of the display, a standard audio file icon appeared. Let us listen very closely to that supposed willing authorization, I commanded the room. I hit play. The expansive living room immediately filled with my mother's voice. It sounded incredibly tired, slightly raspy, but undeniably clear, explicitly authorizing an immediate wire transfer for hundreds of thousands of dollars to an offshore holding account. A few aunts gasped loudly, instantly recognizing Eleanor's highly distinct, authoritative cadence, but on the right side of the screen, a complex, multicolored digital spectral analysis began to play in perfect, undeniable synchronization with the audio file. What you are hearing on the left side of the screen, I explained, my tone turning dangerously cold and relentlessly clinical, sounds exactly like my mother. But what you are looking at on the right side is the raw, unedited digital frequency blueprint of that exact audio file. Human vocal cords naturally produce microscopic breath fluctuations, organic acoustic anomalies, and subtle pitch variations. This spectral graph, however, is flawlessly flat and mathematically perfect. It is completely devoid of all natural human biological markers. That voice is not my mother. It is a highly advanced, artificial intelligence-generated deepfake that you personally rendered using synthetic vocal sampling software. The horrified shock in the room immediately morphed into absolute, sickening repulsion. I pressed my advantage, locking my icy gaze entirely onto his sweating, trembling face. This is no longer just a disgusting, petty family dispute over inheritance money, I stated, ensuring every single affluent guest heard the legal gravity of my words. What you have committed here falls under the absolute highest federal severity of wire fraud and aggravated digital elder abuse. You completely weaponized my mother's terminal illness against her. I have the digital security logs proving that while she was heavily sedated under powerful, mind-altering pain medication, you used her compromised, helpless state to digitally forge her biometric signatures. You bypassed her strict banking security protocols to illegally feed your pathetic, failing crypto gambling addiction. The sheer, crushing reality of massive federal prison time finally shattered Chloe's remaining, fragile composure. She stumbled violently away from Julian as if he were suddenly highly radioactive. Her carefully crafted, tragic caregiver poise completely disintegrated into sheer hysterical panic. "I did not know," Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice shrill and trembling as she turned on her husband with vicious, terrified speed. "I had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. He handled all of the finances. I never knew anything about stolen money or artificial intelligence or forged voices. He lied to me too, I swear it." I felt a dark, ruthlessly satisfying smirk pull at the corner of my mouth as I watched her desperately try to throw him under the bus to save herself. "Did you really honestly think I would not perform a full forensic audit of your personal cloud storage?" "Chloe," I asked her calmly. I tapped my spacebar one final time. The deepfake spectral analysis vanished from the smart glass wall, instantly replaced by a massive, high-definition projection of a highly private, supposedly encrypted chat log between Chloe and Julian. The timestamps and read receipts were glaringly, undeniably clear. "You did not just know about the deepfakes," I stated, reading her own damning, digital words directly from the bright screen for the entire horrified room to hear. "You actively, intentionally provided Julian with dozens of pristine, high-quality audio recordings of our mother's voice specifically to train his artificial intelligence model. You secretly sent him old voicemails and video clips from when she was completely healthy and strong, explicitly so he could perfect the digital forgery without triggering the bank's fraud detection algorithms." Those projected text messages were the absolute, final nail in their shared coffin. The wealthy investors, elite neighbors, and retired aerospace engineers standing shoulder to shoulder in the living room suddenly realized the horrific, widespread scope of the deception. They had not just been lied to socially, they had been conned financially. The affluent guests realized with sickening clarity that they too had poured their own substantial wealth into Julian's fraudulent startup, basing their investments entirely on these forged, stolen assets. The collective, stunned silence of the room instantly mutated into a vicious, highly unified rage. The wealthy crowd turned against the couple like a pack of starving, bloodthirsty wolves. Influential tech executives began shouting furiously, demanding their investments back and threatening immediate legal ruin, while my extended family recoiled from Chloe in total, unfiltered disgust. The golden, flawless couple of Silicon Valley was now completely isolated, drowning helplessly in a violent sea of extremely wealthy, extremely angry victims, utterly trapped by the undeniable, hard digital evidence burning brightly on the wall. The furious shouting of the betrayed investors and the disgusted murmurs of our extended family bounced off the high vaulted ceilings, creating a deafening, chaotic symphony of righteous anger. But Julian, cornered and rapidly suffocating under the heavy weight of his own exposed crimes, was simply not ready to surrender. He wiped a thick, desperate sheen of sweat from his forehead, his chest heaving as he clutched the sleek black tablet to his chest like a bulletproof vest. "It absolutely does not matter," Julian screamed, his voice cracking violently over the roar of the hostile crowd. He thrust his shaking finger frantically toward the blackened smart glass wall. "The cryptocurrency transfers do not change a single legal thing. That digital estate contract is absolutely airtight. Your mother signed it with her own verified biometrics exactly 3 weeks ago, under the strict letter of the law. That entire $8 million estate, this multi-million-dollar house, and every single one of her valuable tech patents belong exclusively to Chloe. You cannot rewrite a legally binding blockchain contract just because you are angry." I looked at him standing there, pathetic and drenched in fear, and for a brief, fleeting moment, the icy, relentless anger burning in my chest softened. It shifted into a profound, aching wave of grief, heavily mixed with a fierce, undeniable pride for the woman we had just buried. I raised my hand, and the sheer authority radiating from my posture forced the furious crowd to fall into a hushed, anticipatory silence. "You truly believed she was just a frail, clueless old woman staring blankly out the window. Did you not?" I asked, my voice suddenly dropping into a quiet, deeply resonant register that commanded the entire room. "You looked at a retired, brilliant aerospace engineer, a woman who literally designed highly classified orbital navigation systems for the federal government, and you arrogantly assumed she could not understand a basic residential network packet manipulation." Julian blinked, his frantic confidence stalling. "Exactly 18 months ago," I revealed, letting the secret timeline finally step out of the shadows. Long before her physical condition severely deteriorated, my mother noticed the subtle data anomalies on her private home servers. She tracked the erratic, unauthorized bandwidth spikes tracing directly back to your encrypted crypto wallets. She completely unraveled your pathetic little digital scam in a single afternoon. "So why did she sign it?" Chloe shrieked from the floor, tears of sheer panic streaming down her ruined designer makeup. "If she knew everything, why did she let Julian continue to handle the accounts?" "Because she contacted me," I replied, feeling a sharp sting behind my eyes that I quickly blinked away. She bypassed your compromised local network and reached out to me on a secure, military-grade encrypted channel. I looked around the room, making sure my family heard the undeniable truth about our absence. For over a year, while you two were busy parading around town, spending stolen money and posting fake, tragic photos to gather sympathy, my mother and I were quietly repairing our deeply broken relationship in the dark. We spent hundreds of hours exchanging heavily encrypted messages late into the night. We talked about my childhood, her profound regrets, and my career. We forgave each other for the past. I got my mother back, and she got her daughter back, completely hidden from your greedy, watchful eyes. I took a slow step closer to Julian, my tone hardening back into a ruthless, unyielding weapon for justice. We realized very early on that if we confronted you directly with the fraud, you would instantly panic. You had full medical power of attorney. You would have confiscated her communication devices, fired her trusted private nurses, and physically isolated her in a cut-rate care facility where I could never reach her again. We simply could not risk her physical safety. So, my mother and I decided to play a brilliant, high-stakes game of digital espionage right under your incredibly arrogant nose. You are lying, Julian breathed out, shaking his head in rapid, rigid denial. Julian, that massive pool of $8 million in liquid assets that you think you are inheriting today, I asked, tilting my head slightly. It does not exist anymore. It has not existed in this country for a very long time. Julian froze, his frantic breathing abruptly hitching in his throat. Over a year ago, I explained with methodical, devastating precision, my mother and I quietly established a highly secure, airtight offshore blind trust. Working silently with elite international asset managers, we legally funneled every single penny of her actual, legitimate wealth out of your reach. The aerospace patents, the vast investment portfolios, the massive retirement accounts. They were all completely liquidated and securely transferred to an untouchable financial fortress. I watched his eyes dart wildly back and forth as the horrifying realization finally began to set in. He looked down at the glowing tablet in his shaking hands, treating it as if it were a live grenade. "Then what did she sign?" Julian whispered, his voice completely hollowed out by absolute dread. "What is actually inside the smart contract? You forced a dying woman to digitally sign a blockchain contract 3 weeks ago," I said, relishing the utter destruction of his reality. "But because you were too arrogant to actually read the complex, underlying hexadecimal code she meticulously drafted, you did not realize what you were inheriting. That smart estate contract does not hold $8 million. Julian, it holds the exclusive digital rights to a registered corporate shell company." The entire room held its collective breath, hanging on my every word. "And what does that shell company own?" I asked, answering my own question before he could even blink. "Absolutely nothing but the massive, crippling corporate debt you secretly accrued. My mother legally transferred all of the toxic financial liabilities you generated under her name directly into that shell entity. By aggressively forcing her to sign that contract in front of a digital notary, you did not secure an $8 million fortune. You legally, permanently chained yourself to millions of dollars of insurmountable debt." Before Julian could even begin to process the catastrophic reality of his newfound financial ruin, a tall, imposing figure stepped out from the very back of the hushed living room. The angry murmurs of the crowd instantly quieted as Marcus, a highly respected estate executor and one of the most ruthless tech lawyers in the Pacific Northwest, walked calmly into the center of the standoff. Marcus adjusted his silver spectacles and looked at Julian with utter, freezing contempt. "I can officially confirm everything Sophie has just stated," Marcus announced, his deep voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "Furthermore, Julian, as the legal executor of Eleanor's true, hidden estate, I was instructed to wait for Sophie's digital presentation to conclude. Exactly 10 minutes ago, I securely forwarded the entirety of her decrypted forensic evidence, including the deepfake audio files and the illegal cryptocurrency ledgers, directly into the hands of federal authorities." Julian was hyperventilating now. His eyes darted wildly around the room, finding absolutely no sympathy, only profound disgust from the wealthy peers he had tried so hard to impress, driven by a final, unhinged wave of sheer desperation. He looked down at the tablet still gripped in his sweating hands. "The house," Julian screamed, spit flying from his lips as his manic eyes locked onto me. "The liquid cash might be gone, but this property is worth millions. This coastal estate is legally bound to the smart contract, and I still have administrative control." Before anyone could stop him, Julian furiously swiped his finger across the glowing glass, manually executing the final digital signature to formally claim the overarching estate assets. He let out a breathless, triumphant laugh, believing he had salvaged at least a massive fraction of his stolen wealth. I did not try to stop him. I simply watched him with a cold, predatory satisfaction as the confirmation screen illuminated his pale, sweating face. "I genuinely hoped you would be arrogant enough to press that button," I told him, my voice completely devoid of pity, because my mother and I coded a highly aggressive poison pill directly into the core architecture of that exact smart contract. Julian's victorious smile instantly vanished. He stared at the tablet as a massive red warning command aggressively overrode his screen. "The moment you manually executed that fraudulent signature," I explained, delivering the absolute, crushing climax of our digital trap, "the smart contract automatically triggered an irreversible, massive data dump. You did not just claim ownership of a useless shell company, you just broadcasted an automated, highly classified distress signal directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That system just formally froze every single one of your startup's banking accounts and instantly exposed your entire, unencrypted shadow network of illegal crypto ledgers to the federal government." I unzipped a small compartment on my leather portfolio and pulled out a crisp, physical piece of paper. I walked forward and slid the legally binding document across the polished oak coffee table until it stopped right at his trembling knees. "That is a formal, 30-day eviction notice," I stated cleanly. "While you were busy trying to steal my mother's money, I used my own corporate intelligence salary to legally purchase the entity that holds the actual, physical deed to this Seattle house. I am the sole, indisputable owner of this property. You and Chloe have been living here as my non-paying tenants for exactly 1 year, and your lease is permanently terminated." Right on cue, the heavy blinding flash of red and blue emergency lights pierced through the thick gray fog outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The aggressive wail of federal sirens shattered the quiet morning of the wealthy neighborhood. The heavy oak front doors of the reception were violently breached, swinging open to reveal a highly coordinated team of federal cybercrime agents, their tactical gear a stark contrast to the bespoke suits and designer dresses filling the room. They had been guided straight to the property by the automated, undeniable distress signal Julian had just foolishly triggered himself. "Julian Crawford," the lead agent barked, flashing a federal warrant as 2 officers instantly flanked the terrified tech bro. "You are under arrest for aggravated wire fraud, grand larceny, and felony digital elder abuse." Julian did not even try to fight. He was completely broken. He was violently spun around, his hands shoved behind his back, and the cold steel handcuffs clicked shut with a sharp, echoing finality. The affluent neighbors and elite investors parted like the Red Sea, watching in absolute, disgusted silence as the smooth-talking venture capitalist was dragged out of the beautiful home in complete disgrace. Chloe was left completely alone, stripped of her fake, stolen wealth, entirely abandoned by her criminal husband, and permanently exiled from her elite social standing. Her legs finally gave out. She collapsed into a pathetic heap on the hardwood floor right at my feet, her pristine designer mourning clothes instantly losing all their manufactured glamour. She reached a shaking hand out toward my boots, weeping uncontrollably, begging for a mercy she had never once shown our dying mother. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. I did not yell. I did not gloat. I simply stepped cleanly over her, walking toward the massive windows overlooking the misty ocean, I had permanently broken the relentless cycle of toxicity that had plagued our family. This beautiful coastal estate would no longer be a monument to their performative greed. Tomorrow, I would officially begin the process of turning my mother's home into a dedicated, heavily fortified sanctuary and cybersecurity training hub to protect vulnerable seniors from digital predators. The trap had worked perfectly, and the ghost of the quiet younger sister was finally at peace. Thank you so much to everyone for staying with me and listening to this incredible story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging and deeply satisfying, please consider helping us keep this channel alive by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you can listen to our absolute best, highly exclusive true stories that are fully dramatized and simply too intense to publicize on YouTube. You can join our amazing community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Thank you again for your time, and I will see you in the next story.